Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cryptoverse. We're going to talk about Bitcoin and the Fear and Greed Index today. If you like what you see, please, this is where you can find the Fear and Greed Index if you're not already familiar with it. At the moment, it's at level 50. This will be changed in 58 minutes. This means that the Fear and Greed Index might be changed by the time you watch this video. Market movement, social media, dominance, and trends are just a few of the things that make it up. That's what makes it up. I like to look at it because in general, the fear and greed measure will go up to the 90s and then down to less than 20, right? Remember earlier this year when the fear and greed index hit 90? I said at the time that things would probably go more like they did in 2019, with only a few fear and greed index data points in the 90s, instead of what we saw in late 2020 and early 2021. That might not have gone over well back then when things were at an all-time high. For a lot of people, it meant that it was more likely to happen here than in 2019, but this shows that all-time highs don't always bring people back, like it did in late 2020 and early 2021. It seems like you should also have altcoins join the party, and in March, Bitcoin was on its way to an all-time high. However, many altcoins have not yet reached their all-time highs. So you could say that's why it didn't stay in that area of high grade for longer, it was only Bitcoin. And to be honest, I think a lot of people have bigger positions in altcoins than they do in Bitcoin, even though they know Bitcoin is king. This did happen in the end around 2019. Okay, I see. Also, it's been about 6 months. Remember that the 2019 slump lasts for about 6 months. This time too, it's been about 6 months. As of right now, it's still not clear if things will go the same way. If you remember what happened the last time Bitcoin went up and then fell hard, I don't think it will go the same way this time. Remember that. On top of that, the fear and greed index still needs to break through the lower high structure in the short run. Okay. I also believe that the fear and greed measure for Bitcoin needs to break the lower high structure in the same way that the price does. If you look at the raw numbers, you can see that the high point was around 90 in March. Then it fell to 78 in June, and then it fell again to 74 in July. The highest point so far in this rise is around 59. It's likely going to go up now. Something new is coming out in less than an hour, so I'll post this movie after I finish making it. But this is another system that it has to break in the end. As you can see, it hit smaller highs in 201995, then 84, then 66, and finally in the 40s. After that, it finally began to hit a higher high. Even though the price went down, there was a difference between fear and greed. The price was very close to something we saw in 2022, but it was the opposite, right? The fear and greed index hit its lowest point in June 2022. The price then went down a little in November, but the fear and greed index was still higher. That difference could show up at some point just like it did in 2019. That sounds like a cool thing to keep an eye on. We haven't seen that split form yet, but it's clear that we should keep an eye out for it. Early 2021 shows the same thing that took place in 2020. It looks like this is where the fear and greed measure reached its highest point. Even though the price went up a little, the fear and greed indicator was already going down. So I think that might help you figure out when trends are changing and when fear and greed are coming apart. If the price makes a higher high and the fear and greed makes a lower high, that could be a sign, or the other way around, right? Also, if the price makes a lower low and the fear and greed make a higher high or lower low, that could be a sign. In fact, that's kind of how the last few moves went, right? It was like the end of 2022, the price, fear, and greed were all at odds with each other. After that, there was a split in early 2021 between the price, fear, and greed. Using the moving average is another thing that might be worth your time, right? Fear and greed X is great, but there are times when people are very greedy, like when it hit the 90s in early November or in November 2020. If you had sold all of your Bitcoin at that point, you would have missed another 3x move, right? Adding a moving average could help clean it up a bit. This is a semi. If you'd like it to be a little clearer and more useful, you could switch to an EMA where it goes to a little faster. But then I thought, hey, how does this stack up against 2019? It's interesting that the fear and greed of the next 30 to 80 sema in 2019 topped it around 75. Then it went over 80 this time. Then it finally hit a low point here in September at 30. Then another low at 24 and finally the last low at 12, right? That's why you can see these lower lows. But before the hard fall, we did see a higher high. So far, we've seen a low point, then a high point, and then another high point. Then there was a low, a lower high, a lower high, a lower low, a lower high, and a lower low. Now, this is where it's going. We need to keep an eye on it to see if it actually hits a higher high. One could say that if it makes a higher high, it's beginning to follow the pattern that was seen when Bitcoin came out of the decline in 2019. It could just be a repeat of what happened in 2019 if it fails to make a lower high. In fact, you can see that it bounced in early September 2019 in 2019 from an estimate of 30 days of fear and greed, which is where it pretty much just bounced from in September 2024. The fear and greed index 30-day projection went up to a little more than 43 at that time. That number is 37 right now for the next 30 days. I would also keep an eye on that because, well, history does repeat itself every once in a while, and you might see a move like the one we saw in 2019. Watch out for that. And I will, of course, give you information. I don't give updates on the fear and greed index more often than once a month because there isn't much going on with it for longer stretches of time. But you would like an EMA, right? When you look at a 30-day EMA, you can see that it has begun to move up a lot. Also, this is pretty much where it bounced from in September 2019, right? It's kind of the same in September 2024, September 2019. And so there are still a lot of similarities with 2019. And again, I go back and forth on whether the time-based part, where you already had a 6-month downtrend, or these other parts are more important. Structural things that happen that we've talked about a little in earlier videos, and we'll talk about some more in future videos as well. But that's where Bitcoin stands on the pointy measure. As of now, this system has not changed. However, I think it will start to change as the year ends and early next year begins. That's all there is to say about the movie. Today we're going to keep it short. Thanks to everyone who watched. Don't forget to subscribe and give the movie a thumbs up. See you next time. Goodbye.